Hello everybody, I'm here in Montreal with my good friend, Mr. Adam Bauer. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Adam is an international recording artist, a Kirtan. Tell me just a bit more about the type of music.
Yeah, basically it's Kirtan devotional chanting out of the Indian Bhakti Yoga tradition. So it's calling the names of God in her many forms, along with a funky beat and some good melodies, and it's a call and response, ecstatic, shared community singing experience. It's quite a sweet time.
Tell me how it gets ecstatic.
Because we're using our breath and our energy, and we're singing vibrational mantras that are encoded with incredible power and depth of teachings and wisdom and embodied awareness. And when you do that with a bunch of your friends who you love in a space and it's good music, and you do that for an hour or two or three, you know what tends to happen is you start finding you're falling in love with people in a very beautiful, heartfelt, sweet way. The devotional nectar brings forth the remembrance that we are essentially one being taking form in all these different ways, just basically so we can explore and discover and come to re-understand life.
And in Tantra, it's like we use breath, sound, and movement, and here I'm guessing you're using singing, which is sound. You need to breathe, and movement is is there dance?
There's definitely spontaneous dance. When you feel the mood, people often, twirl in the corners away, but often it's done also just seated. You can lie down, really, whatever position feels comfortable. This practice comes mostly from the Hindu tradition.
Okay.
Most of the bhajans or sacred songs or the kirtans that I sing, I come mostly through a tradition that is heavy on Krishna and Radha, and Ram devotion, kind of the Vishnu side, the preservation side of the creation, preservation, destruction trio. Hindustan, the land of the Indus River.
Exactly, that's
where that name came from. But 500 years ago, there really weren't any Hindus to speak of. Even 500 years ago, if you talk to, or certainly thousands of years ago, devotees and practitioners of Shiva worship would not consider themselves the same religion, the same umbrella religion as Krishna worshippers.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Radha is the beloved of Krishna,
That is correct. Radha and Krishna are... Krishna is said to be a real historical personality, and there's, he had a birthplace and a whole bunch of, things tied to that. Krishna lived and spent up through his adolescence in an area called Vrindavan, and it's an old temple town. Even today, Vrindavan has just thousands of temples. It's an incredibly sacred place. So
earlier we were talking about, a personal situation that was happening in my life, and I was saying this is the way I want to go forward with it, and you quickly said, I need to talk to you about Bhakti...
and the Leelas.
Bhaktis and the Leelas.
Yeah, the Leela, right, the Leela. Leela translates as divine play, and so it's kind of a way of just perceiving the world in which we see the dramas and the comings and goings of things, the ups and downs of our experience in life, as being sort of part of how, consciousness, awareness, God, however you want to think about it, is manifesting and playing itself out in the world. There's a way to look at our life in this material plane as being like, oh, we're living, this is sort of an illusion, it's all Maya, this is sort of fundamental illusion. The idea is to sort of transcend this in some fashion and get to a place where we no longer have to be in this place because it's inherently, dark or illusionary. But the Bhakti Yoga view is actually kind of the opposite face of that, and that can be summed up in that word Leela, this idea of the divine play. It's not that everything's kind of rotten and illusionary down here. If we kind of look at it right, we can experience it as a kind of a divine play of experiences and learning opportunities and adventures, and it's not always easy or fun, but partly we learn through that friction, through that give or take. Seeing life seeing the adventures of life as kind of the Leela playing out is, in a lot of ways, kind of a more, it feels like a more satisfying way of experiencing the world. Bhakti is the yoga of devotion and love. It's
devotion to what?
devotion to what is worth being devoted to. I mean, do we want to waste our time on lower pleasures or lower iterations of what is meaningful and interesting in life? Or do we want to go to the root, to the core meaning? Do we want to go to the highest possible expression or understanding or embodiment of what life is, of what live is? So I think, most of us have had enough of the Allah-loving people fighting with the Jehovah-loving people, fighting with the Christ-loving people. I mean, this is madness. It's madness. What seems more likely to me is that at different times in different cultures, the ineffable, sublime oneness, love vibration that is everything in the multiverse, it spills out. It sometimes, crystallizes itself in these forms, and, maybe so the forms have some form and they speak to that culture and that time in a way that is appropriate and makes sense in that time. There's an essence of oneness to the whole game. It's not about multiple things and us against them. Ultimately, it's not the yin and the yang. The yin and the yang come from the oneness that they express. And so that oneness is a common theme in all these religions, our common humanity. Everything in the material flow is in fact an expression of divine vibration. And it's too bad if we miss that, but because we sometimes miss that, doesn't make it not real.
You've put out an album recently. I don't know, do you want to talk about your music, your album? Where do you want to go with this?
Sure. I've been playing Kirtan music for almost 15 years now. I started playing, I'm a bass player for...
So Kirtan, in a quick...
Kirtan is the call and response chanting of the names of God, generally in the Sanskrit tongue, generally mantras and names of God coming from Sanskrit. But it's basically this sacred chanting of the names of the divine, call and response in a group of people, usually with musical accompaniment. Shyam is another name for Krishna. It's the dark color of a swarthy storm cloud, a thunder cloud that's just about to let rip. That blue-black, that's the Shyam, another name for Krishna. So I've been a bass player for most of my life. I was playing bass in a reggae band with a bunch of friends in my 20s and 30s. And at a certain point I discovered Kirtan. I started going to a few chants. I went and heard Krishnadas chant a little bit, who's a well-known chanter from the States who has really pioneered and opened up a tremendous amount of territory in bringing Kirtan into the West. Somewhere along that ride, actually just a couple months after, right around the time I started playing with KD, just after he invited me, but maybe even before I started playing with him, I met Shyamdas, who was actually kind of a godbrother, a Gurubai of Krishnadas's. They both went to India in the early 1970s to meet Neem Karoli Baba, who was a famous incarnation of God. One of the real blessings of playing with Krishnadas, in the time that I did, was steeping in that Neem Karoli Baba energy and satsang, because there's a lot of devotees and people in the chanting world who are connected with Maharaji's presence, and that's a beautiful thing to be able to be in the association of. After a few years, after meeting Shyamdas, I started playing a little bass with him also, and then I ended up playing with him for the last 8 years of his life. So these different devotees from the Maharaji lineage and some others started bringing this Kirtan practice into yoga studios in New York City and different places. And after a number of years of slowly percolating away, you know, you see what's happened now is that there's an awful lot of people chanting Kirtan in the West. It's really become a much more commonly seen and shared experience. Like, I just did a program here in Montreal, actually, this past weekend, and there were several people in the circle who had never done Kirtan before. And after the very first chant, maybe 15 or 20 minutes of chanting, we were doing a little bit of a check-in at some point just after that, and there was one person in the room who said, basically he said he was weeping, he was crying, he was feeling all this emotion and peace and sweetness, and he was having a tremendous response to his very first kirtan, and that's the kind of sort of graceful, melting, healing. You get into that space of communion where you're really feeling the universe. We're feeling our connection with each other, and it's a blessing. It just feels, it's so tender and loving and kind and delicious to be in that remembrance of God's grace and mercy.
So there's like a certain communion that happens with the people in the room and the voices and the vibrations of all that alchemy, that auditory alchemy.
And the emotional alchemy and the devotional alchemy, and then eventually it's not even just the people in the room that you realize you're melting into a love puddle with. It's actually the entire universe. There's far more that connects us and establishes and demonstrates our essential unity with each other than the little bits of difference.
Of cult.
And after all, the little bits of difference are so sweet, because if we were all the same, that would be quite boring. So the sort of the luscious diversity and the manifold ways in which life expresses itself, it's more to be celebrated and enjoyed than to be fearful about the differences.
So then, as a practice, where are we going with this now?
Well, as a practice, there's two main practices of the Bhakti Yoga tradition. One is this Kirtan, this getting together with your friends and chanting God's names until you all fall into an ecstatic puddle and commune with the elements together. And then usually afterwards there's a big feast and everybody hangs out and eats.
Which we're going to try tonight here.
And then they also enjoy making space for satsang, basically, which is to gather in good association. Gather with people you love, people who you respect and honor, people who have integrity and kindness and sweetness, and hopefully some sort of devotional mood or orientation, and you engage in conversation and connection and community around things that are worth connecting about. Just sort of talk things that kind of line us up, things that nourish us at a soul level, at a deep level. Like, I love watching movies, I love doing all kinds of things, and a good novel, count me in. I'm all kinds of happy to live in the world. But at some level, do we really want to waste too much of our time and energy, our precious prana? Do we want to spend that, watching a bunch of, televised sports, or, tracking the political deprivation,
mediocre, that's what I call it. Mediocre.
Yeah. So, instead, when we devote our time and our energy into helping others, serving what's highest and what's most beautiful in the world, chanting God's names with our friends, playing sacred music, studying scriptures, and talking and reading devotional poetry. It's so those are the practices of Bhakti Yoga.
Yeah, it's nice. It's really nice.
Yeah.
I just came back from Israel, and one of the realizations I had when I was there, I did Egypt and then Israel, was I went into a massage workshop, and it was on a Friday night, and it stopped in the evening for Shabbat. And just the practice, the act of stopping and ritual and intention setting and bringing in the light, or quote unquote, whether it be through prayer or meditation or chant, sacred chant, is beautiful. And it was in that moment, I came out of that moment and I said, this is something I got to start doing here, because personally I'm not connected to it. So I've looked for it, but it hasn't shown up. So I just decided I'm going to start doing it. My experience of your music was very heart-opening. Like I had, emotional reaction to the tone, the vibration, and the frequency of what you were bringing through.
I really have come to appreciate that if we want to be full, whole, healed beings, that at some level we need to reckon with who we are in our full embodiment, and without making it about sex play or prurient, like kind of giggling, funniness. There's a level of healthy sexual embodiment which a lot of us need help to get to in a certain kind of way. Integration of all these is a tricky and challenging, and I think maybe in some way necessary dance to be on.
In one of the tantric workshops we do, as well as the spiritual shamanic experience, we go through a thing called the circle of consent, and it explains the difference between what is taking touch, what is giving touch, what's allowing, what's accepting, and what are boundaries and whatever. So being in that energy of the music, which is already devotional, seemed to have put us in a space where the energetic that we wanted to be in was one of giving, which is more aligned with this idea of love, and therefore more potential of bringing through light with an extra sensation, which our body are, vehicles of.
Yeah.
So, that's what I got, and that's how I saw it. That's how maybe they don't go together traditionally, but what better way to be having higher energetic sex than to be serenaded with live devotional music.
It may be a thin part of overlap, but in the Venn diagram of sexual reality and devotional reality, there is a place where those two connect. And there's magic in that place. Yeah, there's deep devotion in that place. It's
actually a Vesica Pisces, which is the cosmic yoni, right? So that's creation right there.
Right.
Yeah. So we've also been talking about the 14th ISTA conference on sexuality and consciousness, and it might happen that you're going to be joining us to do a Kirtan workshop.
Yeah, I look forward to that very much. When I share with you some of the poetry and some of the translations of those things, I can't do all of them because I didn't bring all the books with me. But there's some things that, specifically some of the Radha Krishna love poetry and the writings and the scriptures that are considered to be the highest expression of the Krishna Radha Leela experience are extraordinary.
Thank you, brother, for the time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You've been watching the spiritualplayboy.com with Mr. Adam Bauer, international Kirtan recording artist.
I'm not international. I'm just come from 100 miles on the other side of the border.
Yeah, whatever. You play everywhere, bro. You play everywhere.
I played a few places.
Humility. Humility is a beautiful devotional character trait. So that said, AdamBauer.com. What's the website?
I am AdamBauer.com.
Beautiful.
I am Adam Bauer, BAUER. .com.
And this is his CD, Shyam Leela.
Sham Leela.
Sham Leela. And so you could see him in Montreal between May 22nd and 24th at the Sexuality and Consciousness Conference. So join us. It's going to be a great time, and come and experience devotional, sacred chant. Namaste.
Jai Shri Krishna.